Imagine you wake up tomorrow, not in your soft bed, but in a small, dark room with stone walls. The air is cold, the floor is dirty. There is no light switch, no warm shower, no morning coffee. Only the sound of animals outside and the smell of smoke from a small fire. Would you survive even one day in this world? The world of the Middle Ages was not made for comfort. It was made for survival. Today, we complain if our internet is slow, or if the bus arrives a few minutes late. But in the Middle Ages, people feared hunger, disease, and sudden death. Imagine living without clean water, without doctors, without the safety of locked doors. If this strange journey into the past already makes you curious, take a moment to subscribe and join me. Together, we will walk deeper into the shadows of medieval life. The Middle Ages are often shown as knights in shining armor, castles on green hills, and festivals in crowded towns. But behind those images was a harder truth. Life was fragile. The nights were long and dark, the winters were cruel, and even the strong could fall to hunger or sickness. Tonight, we step into that forgotten world, not as tourists, but as silent travelers. So, let us begin where all survival starts. Daily life. How did ordinary people live from sunrise to sunset? How did they eat, sleep, work, and endure the endless challenges? Let us open the door and step inside their fragile world. In the Middle Ages, there were no alarm clocks, no phones, no glowing screens. People woke with the sun or with the sound of animals calling outside. A rooster crowing, cows lowing, or sheep moving in the cold morning air. Life began early because the day was short and full of work. Every moment counted. Even the children had to help, carrying water, feeding animals, or gathering wood for the fire. Comfort was not part of life. Duty was. The small homes were simple and dark. Smoke from the fire filled the room, burning the eyes, but it kept the family warm. Straw mats served as beds. Blankets were rare, often made of old wool. A hard life began the moment you opened your eyes, and there was no time to dream. Survival itself was the only dream that mattered. Breakfast was not eggs, fruit, or sweet coffee. It was a piece of bread, maybe hard and old, dipped into weak ale or thin soup. Meat was rare, fruit was rare, and sugar was a dream almost nobody knew. Hunger walked with families like a silent shadow. The poor survived on whatever they could grow, or on what scraps they could gather. For many, the stomach was never full. Think for a moment. Would you be able to live with such emptiness? Imagine chewing the same bread day after day, without change, without taste, only to keep yourself alive. If this glimpse into medieval daily life makes you think how lucky we are today, pause for a second to like this video. It is a small way to show gratitude for the food, safety, and comfort we often forget to notice. After a poor meal, the work began. Men walked to the fields with tools made of wood and iron. Women carried baskets, tended animals, spun wool, or baked the daily bread. Children worked beside them, not in school, but in the endless rhythm of survival. Fields had to be plowed, weeds pulled, Water carried, fires fed. Rest was rare. Every hand had a task. Every task meant survival. The seasons ruled all. In summer, the work was endless. In winter, the hunger was worse. If a harvest failed, families starved. If the weather turned cruel, life became fragile. This was the reality of the Middle Ages. Every sunrise was another battle with the earth itself, and many did not win. But how did they face the dangers beyond hunger and cold? That is where we must walk next. When the sun set, darkness fell quickly. There were no street lamps, no glowing windows, no soft hum of electricity. Only the faint light of candles or the red glow of fire. Nights were long, and in winter they were cruel. Families huddled close to share warmth, but even then the cold could creep into their bones. Illness came easily. A cough could turn into a fever. A fever could turn into death. Darkness also brought fear. Shadows moved strangely. Owls called in the night, and the silence outside felt heavy. People whispered prayers before sleeping, asking to wake up alive in the morning. For many, there was no guarantee. Each night was a test, a small battle against cold, sickness, and fear itself. Clean water was rare, soap was rare, baths were rare. Most people lived in constant dirt. Clothes were not washed often, and houses were filled with smoke, animals, and waste. Streets outside were worse. Mud mixed with filth, waste thrown from windows, animals walking freely. The smell of a medieval town was something modern noses could not stand, and with dirt came sickness. Simple wounds could rot. Insects spread fevers. Rats carried fleas, and fleas carried death. Doctors had little knowledge, and cures were often more dangerous than the illness itself. To live in such conditions meant living always on the edge, where one cough, one cut, one bite could end a life. In the modern world, children play with toys, go to school, and dream of the future. In the Middle Ages, childhood was short. By the age of 7, many children already worked in fields, carried heavy loads, or served in homes. Play was a luxury. Work was survival. Many children never grew old, as sickness and hunger claimed countless lives before they reached adulthood. Yet, even in this harsh life, children laughed. They chased each other in muddy streets, carved toys from wood, and sang simple songs. Their joy was fragile, but it was real. In the darkest times, even a small laugh could warm a cold night. But could such fragile joy survive in a world of violence and fear? That is the question waiting for us next. In the Middle Ages, clothes were not about fashion. They were about survival. Most people had only 1 or 2 sets of clothes. These garments were heavy, made from wool or rough linen, and they itched against the skin. Washing them was difficult, so they were worn until they became stiff with dirt. A simple cloak was precious, for it kept out the rain and the cold. Shoes, if people had them, were rough leather, thin and weak against long journeys. Colors were simple, often brown, gray, or faded green, because dyes were expensive. Only the wealthy wore bright fabrics or soft silks. For the poor, clothing was just another reminder of hardship. It was not a way to show beauty, but a way to stay alive. Every stitch spoke of survival, and every hole told the story of struggle. Most medieval families lived in small huts made of wood, clay, and straw. The walls were thin, the roofs leaked, and the floors were dirt. A single fire burned in the center, filling the air with smoke. The fire gave light, warmth, and a place to cook, but it also choked the lungs. Windows were tiny, often covered with cloth or oiled paper instead of glass. These homes were not places of comfort. They were places of survival. Families slept close together on straw mats, sometimes even sharing space with animals to keep warm. Privacy did not exist. Every breath, every cough, every sound was shared. Home was not safe from cold or sickness, but it was the only shelter against the wider world. Animals were more than companions. They were tools for survival. Oxen pulled heavy plows through hard soil. Horses carried goods and people across muddy roads. Goats, sheep, and cows gave milk, wool, and meat. Chickens laid eggs, while pigs provided food for the harsh winter. Without animals, life would have been almost impossible. But animals also meant danger. Diseases spread from them to humans. A bite, a kick, or a fall could injure a worker badly. Feeding them was another daily task, one that took time and strength. In this way, medieval families lived not only with each other but with their animals, bound together in a fragile circle of survival. The rhythm of life in the Middle Ages was not ruled by clocks or calendars, but by the turning of the seasons. In spring, families planted crops with hope, their hands deep in the cold soil. In summer, they worked long hours in the heat, fearing storms that could ruin all. Autumn brought harvest, but also fear. Was it enough to last through the long, hungry winter? Winter itself was cruel, testing the body and the spirit with cold, darkness, and emptiness. Each season carried its own danger. Too much rain drowned crops. Too little rain meant famine. A sudden frost could kill an entire harvest overnight. There was no safety net, no storehouse filled with endless food. Nature ruled life, and people lived as humble servants under its changing moods. Survival was not a guarantee, but a prayer. Even in the best years, food was never certain. Bread could be thin, meat was rare, and vegetables were plain. Families often stretched meals, sharing one pot of thin stew among many mouths. In hard times, they boiled weeds, bark, or scraps to quiet the stomach. Hunger was not a visitor. It was a constant presence, sitting at every table, following every family. For children, hunger was the sharpest teacher. Bones grew thin, eyes grew hollow, and energy faded quickly. Yet still, people endured. They learned to survive with little, to hope for tomorrow, and to keep faith that the next harvest might be kinder. Hunger shaped the body, but also shaped the soul. It made people strong, but it also left scars that never faded. Every day in the Middle Ages was a test of strength. Hunger, cold, sickness, and endless work pressed against the body. Families lived close to the edge, never knowing if tomorrow would bring survival or sorrow. And yet they endured, building lives from struggle and shaping history with quiet strength. But daily life was only one part of the story. Beyond hunger and cold, there were other dangers. Dangers that came not from nature, but from people. Wars, punishments, and sudden violence waited around every corner. How safe would you feel walking in such a world? That is where our journey must go next. In the Middle Ages, danger did not only come from hunger or cold, it came from people. A walk through a medieval street could turn deadly in moments. Bandits waited along roads, thieves prowled in the shadows, and strangers were not always friendly. The world was smaller, but it was not safer. Trust was fragile, and fear walked beside every traveler. Fights could break out over land, food, or honor. A simple insult might end in blood. Laws existed, but they were not always fair or strong enough to protect the weak. Violence was common, sudden, and often final. In such a world, every step carried risk, and every corner could hide a threat. Justice in the Middle Ages was harsh. Crimes were punished in public squares, not in quiet courts. A thief might lose a hand. A liar could be put in the stocks for days. Even small mistakes could bring humiliation. People gathered to watch, cheering or cursing, as punishment became a kind of theater. It was a lesson written in fear. But justice was not always just. The poor suffered most, while the rich found ways to escape. Accusations were enough to ruin lives, even without proof. To live in this world was to live under the shadow of sudden judgment. A mistake, a false word, or the anger of a lord could mean the end of your freedom, or your life. Beyond the village walls, war was a constant shadow. Lords fought for land, kings fought for power, and armies marched across fields that once fed families. Villagers could be forced to leave their homes, or even be taken to fight in battles they did not choose. War was not far away. It was always near. The sound of marching soldiers, the sight of burning fields, the smell of smoke and blood. These were not rare memories. They were part of life. Safety was fragile, and peace was temporary. For the poor, war meant fear, hunger, and loss. And so the question rises: if every day carried the risk of war, how could people find hope in such a world? The land was ruled by lords and nobles, who held power over villages and farms. They owned the soil, the forests, and even the rivers. Ordinary people worked on land that was not their own, giving part of their harvest to their lord. Obedience was not a choice. It was survival. Disobedience could mean punishment, loss of home, or even death. Lords lived in stone castles, far stronger and safer than the huts of peasants. Behind their high walls, they commanded soldiers, collected taxes, and decided the fate of many lives. For peasants, the lord was both protector and oppressor. He could defend them from bandits, but he could also demand endless labor. Life was lived under his shadow, a reminder that freedom was rare. Soldiers were both protectors and threats. They guarded castles, patrolled roads, and fought in wars. But they also demanded food, shelter, and sometimes more than people could give. For villagers, the sight of soldiers entering town was not always a comfort. It could mean taxes, forced service, or stolen goods. The clang of armor, The sharp points of spears and the heavy sound of horses made people uneasy. Soldiers brought order, but also fear. A farmer who refused to give grain might be beaten. A woman who resisted could be punished. In such a world, power was shown not through kindness, but through force. And soldiers were the hand of that force. Sometimes danger came without warning. A raid by bandits or an attack by a rival lord could set whole villages on fire. People woke to the sound of screaming, the glow of flames, and the crash of wooden roofs falling. Everything they owned could be gone in moments: food, tools, even family. For peasants, fire was more than destruction. It was terror. With no way to fight back, they could only run or hide. Some rebuilt, others lost everything. These attacks left scars that lasted generations, teaching families that peace was fragile and safety was never sure. A single spark could turn night into nightmare. Medieval towns were crowded, narrow, and full of tension. Streets twisted like a maze, lined with wooden houses leaning dangerously close. At night, the alleys grew darker than caves, and footsteps behind you could mean trouble. Merchants shouted in the daytime, but thieves whispered in the dark. The fear of crime was constant. A stolen coin could ruin a family, and a single fight could end a life. People moved quickly, eyes low, avoiding strangers. The walls of the town offered protection from the outside, but inside, the danger was never far away. Safety was always an illusion. When danger grew too close, every man was called to defend his village. But these were not trained soldiers. They were farmers with wooden spears, blacksmiths with hammers, and boys with nothing but courage. To fight meant leaving your family behind, not knowing if you would return. Imagine standing in a muddy field, facing armed men with armor and swords, while you hold only a wooden staff. Fear burned in every heart, yet people still fought. If this image makes you pause and wonder how you would survive, take a moment to subscribe or share this story. It helps us keep walking together through the shadows of history. Beyond crime and war, there was the brutal display of executions. In the town square, gallows rose high, or the headsman's axe stood ready. Crowds gathered, not only to watch but to cheer, as if death was entertainment. The line between justice and cruelty was thin, and many innocent lives ended under false judgment. The fear of such punishments shaped daily behavior. A careless word, a wrong friend, or even a jealous neighbor could bring doom. The shadow of public death reminded everyone life was fragile, and power could decide fate in a single moment. Among the greatest dangers of medieval life was the spread of plague. Rats and fleas carried death from house to house, village to village. The sickness came fast, with fever, swelling, and pain. Whole families were lost in a single week. Streets fell silent as people feared even to touch one another. Plague showed how fragile safety truly was. Walls could not protect from it, and prayers did not always save. People turned on neighbors, blaming them for spreading the curse. Others fled, abandoning their homes in terror. It was a reminder that danger was not only in swords or fire, it could live in the smallest bite of a flea. Fear was a weapon as strong as any sword. Lords ruled with it, soldiers carried it, and even the church sometimes used it to keep people obedient. The threat of punishment or shame was enough to shape lives. People walked carefully, spoke carefully, even thought carefully, afraid that someone might accuse them. Fear lived in silence. It lived in the glance of a soldier, the whisper of a neighbor, the shadow of a church bell at midnight. Life was not only about what you could do, it was about what you dared not do. And so, fear became part of survival, another invisible chain binding people to the harsh rhythm of the age. The Middle Ages were filled with dangers, violence, war, plague, and fear. Every step was uncertain, and every day could bring loss. Yet still, people endured. They lived, worked, and dreamed in a world heavy with shadow. Danger was not the exception. It was the air they breathed. But even in such a harsh world, people looked for meaning beyond survival. They turned to faith, to symbols, to stories of heaven and hell, angels and demons. These beliefs gave comfort, but also fear. What if every action was judged not only in this life, but in the life beyond? That is where we must walk next, into the world of faith, fear, and the unknown. For medieval people, faith was not just part of life, it was life itself. Every sunrise was met with a prayer, every meal began with thanks, and every sickness was given to God for healing. Churches rose high above towns, their bells calling people to worship. To live without faith was unthinkable. Belief shaped every action. Birth, marriage, and death were marked by sacred rituals. Even the fields were blessed before planting, and journeys began with a prayer for safety. Faith gave the meaning to suffering and explained the mysteries of the world. In a time filled with danger, it was the strongest shelter people knew. Faith also carried fear. People were taught that heaven waited for the good and hell burned for the wicked. Every action could tip the balance of the soul. A lie, a theft, or even an unholy thought could lead to eternal fire. The image of demons and flames haunted dreams and sermons alike. But heaven promised eternal peace, golden light, and reunion with loved ones. This hope balanced the fear, giving people courage to endure the pain of life. Between fear and hope, souls were guided like travelers walking a narrow bridge. And each step felt heavy, knowing that eternity hung in the balance. To touch a holy relic was believed to heal sickness, protect from danger, or even cleanse the soul. Bones of saints, fragments of the cross, or drops of sacred oil were kept in golden containers, guarded by priests. Pilgrims traveled far across muddy roads just to kneel before them, hoping for a miracle. Whether the relics were real or not mattered less than the belief they inspired. A sick child might find strength, a blind man might see, or a poor family might feel hope. Faith gave power to objects, and that power shaped lives. In the darkness of the age, even the smallest light of belief could shine like a star. Across the medieval world, roads filled with pilgrims walking to holy places. Some traveled to great cathedrals, others to remote shrines said to hold the bones of saints. These journeys could take weeks or even months across forests, mountains, and rivers. Many walked barefoot, carrying only faith and a small bundle of food. The journey itself became a prayer. Every step was a sacrifice, every mile a test of the body and soul. Along the way, pilgrims sang hymns, shared stories, and sometimes faced thieves or storms. Yet still they walked, believing that reaching the holy site could bring forgiveness, healing, or a miracle. Their footsteps carved paths of devotion into the land. In a world without science, people looked for meaning in the sky, in animals, and in dreams. A comet streaking overhead might mean war. An owl calling at night could signal death. A strange dream could be seen as a message from heaven or from hell. Life was filled with signs, and people watched carefully for them. These omens shaped choices. A farmer might delay planting because of a dark cloud. A king might begin a war after seeing a heavenly sign. Fear and faith blended into one, making the unknown a constant guide. For medieval people, nothing happened by chance. Every shadow, every star, carried a message from beyond. Fear of the unknown often fell on women accused of being witches. A sick cow, a failed crop, or an unexpected storm could bring blame. Neighbors whispered, and soon suspicion grew. Some women were put on trial, forced to confess under pain, or punished without proof. For the people, witches became symbols of their fear. They represented the mystery of illness, the cruelty of famine, and the terror of storms. In truth, these fears were often about control, power, and misunderstanding. But to the medieval mind, witches were real, and their shadow haunted villages across the land. The church was not only a place of prayer, it was the heart of every community. Bells called people to worship, priests guided their lives, and sermons shaped their thoughts. The church decided when people fasted, when they feasted, and how they confessed their sins. Its voice was stronger than kings, reaching into every home and every heart. For ordinary people, the church offered comfort in dark times. It gave rules to follow, meaning to suffering, and the promise of eternal life. Yet it also carried power, demanding obedience through fear of punishment. In the Middle Ages, the church was not only a building, it was a world. Faith could inspire hope, but it could also control. People were told that obedience would bring heaven, but disobedience could bring hell. This balance of love and fear shaped medieval life. People worked, prayed, and suffered, believing that every moment had eternal weight. And now, think about your own life. If you had lived then, how would you act? Would fear guide you, or would faith give you strength? If this thought stirs something in you, take a moment to like this video or leave a comment. Share what you believe you would have done in the shadow of the church bells. Beyond faith in heaven was the fear of demons. People believed that evil spirits walked in shadows, whispered in dreams, and tempted the weak. Strange noises at night, sudden sickness, or bad luck could all be blamed on unseen demons. To protect themselves, villagers wore charms, prayed, and avoided places thought to be cursed. These fears made the night heavy. A creaking door or the cry of an animal could send hearts racing. In a world with little light, darkness became the home of every nightmare. Faith gave courage, but fear gave shape to the unknown. Together, they ruled the imagination of the medieval world. In the Middle Ages, faith was often tested by trials. People believed that God would show the truth through suffering. Some accused of crimes were thrown into rivers. If they floated, they were guilty. If they sank, they were innocent. Others were forced to carry hot iron, their burned hands judged as a sign of guilt or purity. These trials were cruel, but people trusted them, believing God's will was revealed through pain. For the accused, there was little hope, for survival itself could be twisted into proof of guilt. In this way, justice and faith became one, binding fear tightly into daily life. Death was never far in the Middle Ages. Every family buried children, every village had graves, and every churchyard was filled with crosses. People lived with the certainty that life was short and fragile. But death was not the end. It was the beginning of eternity. Priests described heaven in glowing words, and hell in terrifying ones. Funerals became moments of deep fear and deep hope. Families prayed for the soul of the dead, hoping it would pass through purgatory and into eternal peace. In a world filled with danger, the afterlife gave meaning to every breath. Life was short, but eternity was endless. Faith and fear shaped the medieval world as deeply as hunger and war. People prayed to survive each day, and they feared for their souls in the life beyond. Belief gave them strength, but it also bound them in chains of fear. Yet, when we look back, we see not only darkness, but resilience. Despite pain, they dreamed, prayed, and built cathedrals that still rise into the sky today. Their faith outlived their fear. And so our journey moves to the present, where we can reflect on what it means to live now after walking through their world of shadows. The Middle Ages may feel far away, but their shadow still touches us. We walk through streets once built by their hands. We pray in cathedrals they raised toward the sky. Even our fears, our stories, and our dreams still carry their echo. The past does not vanish. It whispers quietly beneath the noise of today. Think of the warmth of your bed, the light of your room, the safety of your door. These things that feel ordinary would have been miracles in the Middle Ages. We are the lucky ones, living in comfort they could not even imagine. If this journey has made you pause, take a moment to like, subscribe, or share. It helps us keep walking together into more stories of the past. The Middle Ages remind us that survival was once fragile. Every breath was a gift, every sunrise a victory. People lived with hunger, fear, and danger, yet they dreamed, they prayed, and they built. From their struggle came strength, and from their strength came the world we stand in today. So now, close your eyes. Let the fires of the Middle Ages fade, and let the quiet of the night surround you. You are safe here, in this moment, far from hunger, far from fear. Sleep gently as the echoes of the past drift away into silence. And when you wake, may you carry a small piece of gratitude for the life you live today.